Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Whiskey Lounge, our fourth episode here. We missed you last week because my friends here are all lazy. Just kidding. Everyone was a little busy. Nothing wrong there. I'm going to introduce my friends. We got Nick,
What's happening, everybody? This is Nick. Welcome back for another episode of the Whiskey Boys podcast. Glad to be here.
and we have Trevor back with us.
Glad to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful state of affairs we find ourselves in. Unlike America, unfortunately, because while we have a very dangerous chemical spill in Ohio, our president is going over to Ukraine and giving them $500,000, while at the same time denying aid to the people of Ohio.
I believe it was $500 million.
Half a
It,
billion. You are no, you're right. You're right. That I
yeah,
misspoke.
it wasn't 500,000. It was
I
half a billion.
misspoke.
Half a million would not go very far at all.
Indeed, I misspoke. But yeah, very almost baffling. One of those things like put your own mask on before you put the others. It's it's something. I personally I can't believe it. I mean, even with it being our good friend here, Joe Biden. I simply, this is beyond. It's a good thing, though. Former President Trump went over there, gave everyone water and McDonald's. Really a everyman's man. That's what I can appreciate about that, even if it was just a photo op. Some people were saying, oh, it's just Donald going to get a photo op. Well, at least the way he looks at it is, well, here's my photo op. The way I get people to like me is by being a good person and helping these people in need.
I mean, this is the way that American leadership and American politics should go. It shouldn't be trying to get photo ops overseas or diplomacy overseas, promising to give money to other countries that are never going to provide us aid. It should be the politicians coming to small towns or going to areas in need across the country, preferably where the constituents are. However, if something major is going on across the US, you got to try to show that you care about the citizens of this country. And for the fact that the former president went to Ohio to provide this food and the water to these residents just shows how much that he cares, whether or not it was for a photo op or just for publicity. I would much rather take that and take a guy who is just trying to get people to like him if it means good things happen to people in need.
Well, I mean, this isn't anything new. I mean, how long did it take, or did Biden even go down to the southern border when that crisis was happening? I think it's continuing to happen, and there's still, countless people that are being held in detention centers and whatever. But he took forever, and still don't know if he ever went. I know Harris eventually went after like a year of controversy and people asking, "Hey, is anybody going to go down there? Is anybody going to address this?" But I mean, it's nothing new, you know? And he's over doing the European tour and focusing entirely on Ukraine, while at home we have several incidents that, could really use some federal support and federal attention, but aren't receiving it.
You know what? I think that this perfectly exemplifies the cult of the left and how they have virtually no morals whatsoever to stand by. I mean, where's like Greta Thunberg to just say, "How dare you," for this major chemical spill? Where is the EPA with all the protests? Where are all the people who went to all these museums and tried to deface all this priceless artwork? Why aren't they going close to the zone? I wouldn't want them to be actually there because it was toxic at the time, and it still is, even though a lot of the chemicals that were there have a half life of like 2.5 days. So we're only experiencing less than, I think it was 10% of the one chloride chemical that was
Vinyl
there.
chloride.
Yeah, the vinyl chloride. We only have about 10% left of it there, but it's the benzenes that are the major issue. However, why aren't we seeing such major outcry from the, I don't want to disrespect them, but why aren't we seeing so much from the tree huggers, the people who claim to care so much about the environment? Why aren't we seeing an uproar and all the protests from them? It's only the people who live in this area where we're seeing the most outcry.
I'd say it wouldn't be a bad thing to to I have a level of disrespect for them because everything about them is complete bullshit. I mean, this is one of those obvious reasons that show it's just complete bullshit. There was a video few weeks ago of reporters walking up to Greta Thunberg like in the street and asking her questions, and she had no words. Like I don't remember exactly what they were asking her. I don't remember exactly what she said, but she practically have no words. Like these people, they're people they take, and honestly, you can kind of feel bad for Greta Thunberg because she's a literal child or was until
How
sometime this
dare
year, I
you?
think. They literally take this child and plaster her in front of the world as some sort of environmental activist when in reality, hell, I wouldn't be surprised if she doesn't really have the biggest idea of what she's talking about.
She's not a scientist. You know, she doesn't have the facts. She's repeating what she's heard from everybody else. She's not an expert in any form or fashion. And I mean, you can't really blame her because this is what she's been being told and is, you know, being praised for saying, is like, oh, look at her, she's so bold, she's so courageous. But you know, how are we supposed to take anything that she says for any kind of value when she's not an expert? You know, like she's not. And there are experts that are saying completely opposite in saying, well, you know, specifically about the EV vehicles, which are a big push in, you know, America right now, and everybody's hailing them as the coming of the next age. When in actuality, we have these African cobalt mines that are just inhumane to say the least, but are also contributing massively to the actual like CO2 emissions that are being produced in this world.
I mean, hell, so.
And
Oh, sorry, did not mean to interrupt you.
no, it's fine. But all this to say, this whole EV push by the environmentalists is harming the environment more than if we had 100 coal factories that were running, you know, 24/7. It's kind of ridiculous.
Exponentially more, actually. It's probably, I would even say, arguably, depending on how much you've looked into it, worse than you might think. You know, I've worked in the automotive industry. I do currently. Um, the amount of fossil fuels emitted for mining the lithium ion is worth some like 40 years of emissions. It's something crazy like that. Not only that, you can't get rid of lithium ion batteries. They're
Well,
toxic and you can't get rid of them. And one last thing, contrary to popular belief as well, electric vehicles do emit emissions. Significantly less emissions, sure, but they do emit some sort of emission.
well, of course they do because they have to get their power from somewhere. And how are we generating that power? Because we've since like the 70s haven't been making any more nuclear power plants. So that means that most of them are natural gas or coal. Guess what those do? They emit emissions.
Yeah, exactly. And another thing too, crazy thing, small thing, but fucking oh my French. Electric vehicles, they have instant torque, so they go through tires exponentially faster.
Oh,
Tires you're
Yeah,
supposed to get
the
like
tire
a
wear is ridiculous.
yeah,
not only that, but
ridiculous. You get like 20,000 miles out of a nice set of tires.
And I think it was an EPA report that looked into it, and with modern emissions, it's tire wear that's producing more emissions than actually what's coming out of your exhaust, because catalytic converters and EPA emissions like rules have gotten so strict and like so refined that honestly your car is producing almost no emissions at all. Like it's crazy how low they are, but they're still pushing it to be like even further, which is just ridiculous.
all right, so I am currently a diesel mechanic and I work for a construction company in Frederick, Maryland. And so the after treatment systems for all of our heavy duty diesel trucks is the number one thing that is always failing. You could have one sensor, for example, a NOx sensor or a particulate matter sensor go up in a truck, and it doesn't matter how small that sensor may be, it will completely deadline a truck and derate it to the point to where it will not move because of all the after treatment. I've been sent to several to one class by for Caterpillar, and the emissions and everything that they have to go through in order to meet EPA standards is absolutely mind-boggling. You're taking all the carbon and all the soot out of on the exhaust side of the engine to keep everything like condensed, and you're essentially turning all that into water and into harmless vapors coming back out. The science behind it is absolutely phenomenal and interesting to look at, but one thing in the whole circuit goes wrong and nothing works and the entire truck is put down. So a lot of this stuff that they're trying to put through just makes industry and the actual foundation of this country at a standstill at some points.
I mean, and it's not just this heavy equipment that it works with.
Oh no.
Even starting from 2013, because I drive diesel trucks, like that's what I drive. I have a 2004 right now, Dodge Cummins, that bulletproof fucking truck, right? My dad got a newer one, 2013. He's had this thing for ages, and what a lot of people are doing is removing the fairy fluid, as we call it, which is DEF, which does that, cleans the system, and basically it just burns what doesn't get burned in the engine, because that's what happens. So that's what a diesel dust is. It's just diesel that went through the motor and didn't get properly burned. All of the chemical potential was not reached. Not all of it was burned, whatever. And that's why when you're burning a diesel engine at peak performance and RPMs and whatever, you don't have that diesel dust. It's just when you're building and the turbo hasn't kicked in and whatever, turbo hasn't spooled. But these diesel trucks, starting from 2012 or 2013 or whatever onwards, if you have an issue with like the NOx sensor or anything else in that system, or you don't have enough DEF fluid or whatever, they go to a crawl. And it's dangerous. Like, it's actually dangerous to have these cars on the highways and interstates, because they'll just go out. Like, there's no warning or anything. It has a sensor go out, you're stuck at 5 miles per hour. Like that. There's nothing that you can do. It's dangerous.
Well, the tiers for the different engines for the after treatments started to be phased in back in 1996. We started getting to our tier fours around 2008, if I'm remembering correctly, and that's when they started doing the after treatment for like the regenerations to be able to burn off all that particulate matter inside, to burn off all the soot, to be able to keep everything clean. And then when the tier 4 final came out is when they started introducing the DEF, and it's just been a nightmare ever since. But continue.
That's all I really had to say.
Oh, okay.
That's fair. We can
Anyway,
we can
back
walk
to
we
Ohio.
can walk back towards Ohio here a little bit. We can talk about how Buttigieg went there and Buttigieg?
Yes.
Is that how you pronounce it?
Buttigieg.
Okay. How he went back there, or finally made it there, rather, after Donald Trump made his visit, and ran away from a reporter asking the pressing question, "Are you going to apologize to these people?" He just ran away, and his press secretary comes up, smirk on her face like something's funny, like, "I don't want to answer anything on camera." Like, come on.
I mean,
Ridiculous.
I'm not normally a huge fan of like ambush questions of like just someone walking down the street and just having reporters just come to just bombard them with questions, because not many people can be prepared for some questions just walking down the street. They don't have the information in front of them at the time. But at the same time, they're not asking like super in-depth questions. They're just asking, why weren't you here sooner? And a simple, we were doing something else, or we were trying to monitor the best way to react to the situation. Something just as small as that would have been perfectly fine. But just to have no answer seems to be worse than even showing up at all.
Oh, exponentially worse. That's really the big problem. I mean, he could have come up with any excuse in the book. We all would have known that it was bullshit, but at least he said something. He straight up ran away from this girl. I can't remember the name of the reporter. In my opinion, it was excellent reporting there. You know that gotcha journalism. I know what you mean. It's not always fun to watch. You know, sometimes it's like, come on, man, like you're making us look ridiculous. But that was a good, straightforward question. It wasn't something stupid. It was a real question that people really wanted the answer to, and they knew the answer. They just couldn't come up with an excuse for it. They knew the answer was there wasn't enough political pressure, my apologies, to come to this place who didn't vote for us.
I mean, how and if you take a look at how the federal government's been taking care of East Palestine, take a look at when Trump admitted or came out with his whole statement saying he is going to East Palestine. He is going to go there. He is going to help the citizens who live there. Take a look at what happened after that happened. You then actually saw Pete Buttigieg start talking about it. You saw the EPA make some kind of statement on it saying, "Oh, well, we're going to be there right away. We're going to postpone our trip to Africa to talk about environmental issues and global warming and all this. We're going to postpone that so we can go there now." But there was nothing. FEMA rejected all requests for some kind of federal aid until after all this happened. They were standing back and saying, "Nope, we're not going to help you. We're not going to help you," for I think it was 2.5 weeks before they finally said yes to doing something.
I didn't even know they said yes.
I'm pretty sure they said yes. I know the EPA is telling the railroad company that they need to fix the mess and they need to take care of it now. If not, then they'll do it, but charge them 3 times the cost.
Did you actually, in regards to the railroads, have you seen, there's a video going around, I saw it on Tim Pool, how just in disrepair some of our railroads are, that they dip like a few feet into the ground where the train has to slow down exponentially, almost a stop. I think this could be in the middle of nowhere to get over them without basically destroying the tracks.
Oh yeah, I know how bad it is. My driveway goes over one of the railroads around here, and it took them a week to come out and cut a down tree that was on the track.
Huh.
Like a full week before anybody actually came out to check it after we had a major windstorm that went through before the tree was taken care of. And I know we
Sheesh.
usually have a lot of train traffic around here depending on the season, but you you still got to have the maintenance done. At least have someone go out there once or twice, if not 3 times a week. Or hell, even after a major storm, just send someone out as opposed to just leave it for a week because
Mhm.
that could have easily derailed another train.
Oh, absolutely.
And
I'm
Our
I've
our tr-
surprised that. Sorry.
our
no, yeah,
train system is just largely disregarded at this point. I don't think people realize. Yes, 18 wheelers have taken up the brunt of transportation in this country, and that's undeniable. But we still have a large amount of things that are transported solely over train tracks,
oh
and
yeah,
it's just completely neglected. And I honestly think I don't have the numbers or anything to back this up. It's 100% just an opinion, but it's mostly just a first off budgeting thing. People aren't putting enough money into it, and secondly, they just don't have the workforce for it.
no,
Yeah,
no, we
yeah.
don't have
There's
the workforce.
there's not a
That's the big.
workforce for anything. Yeah. No one wants to work anymore. Don't know how they're surviving that way, but no one
Well, I
wants to
mean,
work anymore.
it used to be like, oh, 1 in every 5 people knows somebody who works for the railroad, right? Like, I don't know anybody this day and age who works on the railroad, you know?
Oh no, I don't know anybody myself personally who works for a railroad. I know I
Yeah,
work
I
for.
think Deshaun does, or at least he wanted to.
Oh, from school.
Yeah,
Oh,
I know
I
he
know. I thought
wanted
his.
to.
I thought his dad worked for the bus company. I didn't know that he was interested in doing trains. I thought he was going to do buses also.
I don't know if he is working with trains, but he did tell me at one point that he wanted to work for the railroad. I thought it was cool. Anyway, go
Oh
on.
yeah, definitely, yeah.
I mean, it
Go
is a
on.
very interesting, you know, profession to go into, if nothing else. Like, it's a skilled workforce and not too difficult to get into. Like it's kind of there's a lot of entry level positions into it, which is surprising. There's so many. This is kind of going off on a tangent, but there's so many careers like this that are entry level that so many people can have access to. That are well paying jobs and yada yada yada. But like people don't want to go and work on the railroad. It's hard labor. It's not sitting inside in the AC for 8 hours a day. It's actual like labor,
Well,
and people don't want to do that anymore.
we also
also
spent
very
the
long
last
hours.
yes, we've spent the last few decades telling people, or well, I guess not us, but our parents, our grandparents spent the last few decades telling people, you need to go to college, you need to go to college, you need to go to college, or you're not going to get a real job, or they rather say, or you're going to end up like him, and they point to the mechanic, or you're going to end up like him, and they point to the construction worker. When in reality, at least in my experience working around these types of people, they're generally smarter than most of the people I've met that go to college by quite a significant margin. Some of them quite a lot dumber, but a lot of them quite a lot smarter.
I wouldn't necessarily say smarter. I'd say have more common sense or more real life practicality, real life skills. Because you can be book smart, but not have any kind of common sense. And I know I personally conflate common sense with smarts, even though it's not necessarily true.
In a
No, I
normal world.
100% agree with you. Like there is by far a difference in the mindset of somebody who's worked their life to become an engineer and somebody who's just worked and has that experience. For instance, my dad, he works for a company and is the product designer of that company. Head of all engineering. They all work for him. He goes to the engineers and he talks to them and they're planning out this new product, right? And all they say to him is, it won't work, it won't work, it won't work, because they've run it through a CAD and they put it in a CAD program and they're like, yeah, it doesn't add up. He's like, well, I have it actually built right here physically. I'm looking at it and it works. So tell me what's the issue here. And then they have to go through it and figure out that, oh well, it's the computer software or da 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 da. It's just a difference of mentality in that people want to do it kind of the easy way, which is putting it through a computer and putting this here and placing it and da 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 da, rather than physically building something out. Which 9 times out of 10, especially in product designing, it's way faster and way more cost effective just to build it. But that's just the evidence of the difference in thought that comes from the college kind of community versus the blue collar. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. The blue collar community that would rather do something with their hands and build something out and like has that physical experience of how a motor actually works because they've been working on them for 20-30 years, their entire lives, rather than the theoretical knowledge of how something works.
And trying to bring all that information back to the situation going on in Ohio. It's just a bunch of bureaucrats who are saying there's nothing wrong, when you can watch videos coming from the town, from the citizens, where one woman had her entire coop of chickens just die. You have people who have pet foxes that are just dying. You can see schools of fish in the streams just floating along the stream, just dying. So you can say there's not an issue. You can say there's not a problem as much as you want to scream it as high as you can, but you can't argue the videos of the people who are actually living there and going through all this.
But they're gonna try.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, they're always going to try. I mean,
absolutely.
I mean, hell, we need to try to put a lid on this. We can't talk about this. We can't do anything like this. Ukraine is much more important right now. We got to go send $500 million over there because we are fighting a dictator.
Oh, well, it's even more than that. I didn't even realize how much money that we've actually spent on Ukraine. Like it's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's honestly ridiculous.
Yeah,
I was watching a video earlier.
Ridiculous.
I was watching, which this is going to be kind of like getting into psyops, like conspiracy theories here. But I was watching a video earlier, and it was about the production of artillery shells, and I think you've all heard this. Where we're running out of artillery shells. NATO is like having members look into their stockpiles and starting to assess like how their inventories are looking like, and like ordering if they need orders, because apparently the main producer in America right now of artillery shells, which are being sent over to Ukraine, yada yada yada, is in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Which, if you know anything about the current administration, where they come from, the person at the top, guess where?
I know a thing or two.
Yeah. I just found that very interesting and very funny. Kind of a coincidence, if you believe in coincidences. But right there, that's where they're producing like all of these artillery shells that are being sent out. Each one of them costing $800, and apparently we've sent 1 million to Ukraine. I mean, if you do the math on that, it's a lot of money.
It is a lot of money.
That's a whole lot of money.
I have one statement to make on all the money that we sent to Ukraine. Why can't we just use like 1%? Just 1% of all that money in our infrastructure, or to help Americans.
Because
Why
they'd
we-
rather spend it on Ukraine and their goat cafes.
To be
and
fair, I'm going to
their
play devil's advocate
crocheting
here.
classes.
Money laundering scheme. It's just money laundering.
It very well may be, but I'm going to play devil's advocate here. First off, for the infrastructure, if you really wanted to do it right, you're absolutely going to need more money than that. But it's also a problem of bureaucracy and misallocated in just people putting it towards stupid stuff. It's like in Massachusetts when I was staying up there for, it was like almost a year. When I was up there, they had several $1 million allotted to infrastructure. And guess what they put it towards? The only money that they ever used was put into... No. It was specifically allocated towards infrastructure, so they couldn't use it for stupid shit. Like, they had to build it towards infrastructure.
Making
But-
a third bathroom.
No, not quite that bad. They put it towards heated sidewalks. That's the only thing that they allotted it to in 12 months that they had this money, was heated sidewalks in a like very, very top echelon, like 1%er neighborhood. And it's just like, it's stuff like that that's bureaucracy and just misallocation of funds that's a key issue. But also, you need immense amounts of funds to do like a complete rework of the railroad system, which is probably necessary at this point. And I mean, the highways are getting to the point where they could really use some revamping. I mean, you've been seeing anywhere you go, there's some kind of road work occurring. And it's basically just fixing the issues that have risen rather than going ahead and being preemptive about it and saying, all of this needs to be redone. Let's go ahead and do that, which is always the cheaper route to go rather than going back and like doing several repairs, rather than just, going ahead, getting ahead of the problem and knocking it out before it becomes an issue.
Well, when you're getting into that, since I do work for a paving company, I do have a little insight on this. It's a lot more of the counties trying to put the funds together for it, going through a whole bid process, and then all the paperwork that you have to do to get all the permits and do this and do that, and it does tend to get into a more bureaucratic route where it'll take a lot longer to do all that than it would be to just do the work itself. I mean, all the contracts that you have to go through, all the negotiations, it is just a nightmare from a company standpoint of view.
Oh, absolutely. It's pure bureaucracy, and that's like, as great as America is, its greatest downfall is bureaucracy, but it's also its greatest strength at the same time.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say bureaucracy is our greatest strength, because we have too many pencil pushers that don't know what they need to do, and it has to go through 40 other pencil pushers before we can get one decision made.
I'm not saying that it's ideal, absolutely, and there's a lot of, extra just fluff that can be cut out. But what I mean by that, to specify, is bureaucracy implies democracy. And that's what I mean by that, is
He's right.
it's democratic. You can't have a democracy that isn't in some way, shape, or form a bureaucracy, because, that's just how that works. It has to pass through several hands, several people have to agree upon it. It's a whole process, and anything democratic is going to be like that. Anything democratic has to go through several people's hands. It has to be approved by this legislature and then approved by this council or whatever. It's just the way it goes.
I understand that's the way it goes. I'm not disputing that whatsoever. I'm just saying that the extensive amount of bureaucracy we have for people doing repetitive jobs, where I
Oh,
guarantee you'd be able to cut down at least half the bureaucratic jobs and still be able to get the same amount of work done.
Probably more.
Just because of
absolutely.
all the hands it goes through, we have
Probably
just
more
become
work.
so inflated.
Absolutely. There is no denying that at this day and age, 90% of the people that touch a piece of paper that comes into like a work order don't need to touch that work order at all. It just needs to be approved. Like obviously you need to make sure you have the funds and, it's actually something that you guys should be doing, but that's about it. And how many people really need to be involved in that decision making? It's just everybody wants to have their hands, in the pie, so to speak. They all want to be playing a part and feel important and feel like they're doing something.
Everybody wants to be a part of the team.
Exactly.
Everyone wants to be a part of the team, but not put the work in to do it.
I think from this point we can redirect from Ohio to Ukraine as well. Sort of just a few different things going on over there. It pure escalation. Even just Biden's visit and the statements that he made. I personally just see it as a form of escalation, kind of like a poke and prodding at the bear. If you didn't see it, I believe you did, Nick. I don't know if you did, Trevor. Putin put out some sort of propaganda speech about the woke mind virus, I believe is the exact wording that he used. Something like
Yes.
that.
I didn't read that, but that's hilarious.
It's a video. And yeah, he put out a propaganda piece. It was him saying a speech about the woke mind virus and how America is trying to infect the world with said woke mind virus, and how they're going against the churches, and you know the shtick. But what I like to point out from that, in all seriousness, the best type of propaganda is true propaganda. And whether we like Vladimir Putin or not, he is right. He's got a point.
Oh yeah, and to uh, go into your statement on poking the bear. I mean, that's all NATO's been doing for the last 30 years. Ever since the dissolution of the Soviet Union, I think we talked about this like 2 episodes ago also, that we promised that we would not have any more eastern expansion, that we would not encroach any closer to Russia, that NATO would have its borders defined, and we would not encroach. Well, every year since then, we have gotten closer and closer and closer to Russia's borders, to the point to where they're backed in the corner. Whether it's right, whether it's wrong, there's going to be some kind of retaliation. They're going to feel that our words are meaningless if all we're going to do is just go back on it. And to signify that is why they broke their START treaty,
That's what I was
for the
just
last
about to
nuclear
say.
treaty that we had with them. Why should we have the right to go in there and investigate and take into account all of their nukes and them do the same to us if they're just getting ready to take aggressive action towards us? They already view the U.S. as already being at war with them. We just haven't
Yeah,
put
Well,
any
that's the
nukes
thing.
on the
We've
ground shooting.
essentially declared war. And this is kind of what I've realized when looking at this, the investment that we've made with all of these weapons and kind of, we've spent likely in total cost of what these weapons are worth and yada, 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 billions of dollars that have been sent to Ukraine. But effectively, what it's doing is we're fighting a war. We're just not using our own manpower. And the American public doesn't have to be, rallied against in this war effort. We don't have to go to Congress. Biden does not have to go to Congress and have them declare war because we're already waging an economical war and we're not losing any of our people in the process of doing so. It's honestly the best result that the West could have to cripple Russia. Like
I mean,
this is perfect for the West right now. What's going on? They have almost just as much manpower in Ukraine to wield these weapons as we would be able to field in any kind of immediate capacity, and they're giving these weapons to them and giving them the effective training to use them to cripple their army, and that's what's happening.
I mean, to be fair, the U.S. has not declared war since World War II. none of the proxy wars the U.S. has been involved in since World War II, and you can Google it as a fact,
Conflicts.
has never been an actual declaration of war. World War II is the last time we had formally declared war on anybody. So Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, all of it, while I'm never going to say that those soldiers didn't fight a war, it was never a congressional act of war. So the fact that we're hiding behind the fact that we are not at war because we haven't declared it, every war since World War II has been a war but we have not declared it. So
I mean, how long till they just openly declare war on us? You know, they keep saying we've declared it on them, of course, but how long before they just say, all right, fuck it. This is what we're doing. Because you have Zelensky now saying he's not only going to try and push Russia out, he's going to try and take back Crimea.
So
that's probably what he's going to use those tanks for.
We've reached an age where I think the whole formal declaration of wars is just out the window. That was an age of people who did not have the type of information gain that we have now. I mean, how the first battle could happen and we would know about it within an hour, whereas before we could back in World War II, people didn't know about Pearl Harbor until half a day to the end of the day. Now the people in government knew, but the general populace did not know unless they were on the ground that day. Nowadays, it's completely different. I guarantee if a squad of soldiers were to die in an open conflict, there would be a reporting on it immediately, whether it's from us or someone else.
You're not wrong. Even evidence in World War II, there was cases where after ceasefires were signed, there was still casualties inflicted because people the front lines didn't receive the knowledge that these ceasefires had been, agreed upon. But I think that there would still be, if a large-scale war like this, there would still be formal declarations. Now, they might come sometime after, initial attacks, certainly, but especially this day and age, there is clear setup for a coming war. And the scary thing is a lot of those have kind of been met, with Russia backing out of these treaties and, Russia and China meeting and making these pacts and agreements behind closed doors. It's all kind of coalescing into, what is likely to become a large-scale conflict.
It's impossible that it doesn't at this point, in my opinion. If you want me to be completely honest.
I mean, it's definitely going to boil down to that eventually. I don't know how soon it's going to be, but it's almost certainly going to come to it.
Yeah.
I know how much the woke mind virus has infiltrated the U.S. government. I know how much they try to push it for all the commercials, like the that animated army commercial that came out. I think it was like 2 years ago with the girl with two moms and how much they're pushing it. I know firsthand personally because one of my best friends is in the army right now and he's deployed in Hawaii. I talk to him a lot. He's like, that's all a bunch of BS. Like it has not fully reached the ground level grunts yet. And he's just like, yeah, you talk to anybody around here, most of them have the same mindset as you or I. It's just they're amped up on adrenaline and ready to fucking go. Like he's probably one of the few guys that I would trust with just about anything on, and he's sick of the whole woke shit, but at the same time, it has not fully infiltrated them yet.
Yeah, but the worrying thing is, it's not the grunts that are flying the jets and turning the keys, so to say. It's O1s to O10s, and most of that, which is the college educated aspect, which I think is part of the reason why they made it where you have to be college educated, because you get kind of given this culture in colleges, specifically in universities, is where a lot of this culture gets proliferated throughout the populace. But I think that's largely why they made it a requirement. In order to be an officer in any kind of the branches, you have to have the roundabout way of going through officer training school. But typically, if you want to just go in as an officer, you have to go through their college. You have to be gone through college, met their requirements, yada yada yada. And they're the ones at the high levels that, they're already penetrated. They're already subscribed to these ideas and these ideologies.
Funny story real quick. I had a friend who wanted to be an army officer his whole life. Got his SAT scores back, opened it, closed it, looked at me, said, "Looks like I'm gonna be a Marine." Guess his score. Guess his SAT score.
Probably
A 10.
Give me an actual guess.
Yeah, a 10.
A 10.
That's an actual guess.
Your guess is 10. You get 200
Yes.
points for putting your name on the test.
Oh, SAT. I'm thinking ACT.
Yeah,
Okay.
SAT.
700.
700. Nick, what's your guess?
I never took the SAT or the ACT.
You
so
see,
I
you
have
don't
no idea.
know how the scoring works. He got a 600.
I wasn't far off.
Yeah,
700.
you weren't. ASVAB, he got a 33.
Oh, yikes.
Yeah,
Out of 100, right? Out of 100.
Out of 100. And he wanted to be an army officer his whole life. I remember it. We were sophomore year. Opened up the test, closed it, looked at me, said, "I'm gonna be a Marine," and that's what he is.
That's very, very cool. Very based.
Oh, it was so funny. Anyway, let us continue with the woke mind virus and the escalation of this stupid war.
It's just escalating, and like we read in this article, the U.S. can't keep up with China's current navy building. They've been building their navy for some time, and the deficit is only going to increase.
Well, yeah, another thing too, you see, there's this video of these kids in Chinese schools taking apart and putting 1911s back together. These kids have to be like 10, maybe something like that, maybe even younger.
I've never seen that.
They're converting toy guns into actual functioning firearms.
Oh, okay. So I was a little wrong there. Either way, the point is still made. They're training a culture of warriors, and we have guys who are I was literally just about to say we have guys who carve up their faces and claim they're women when they mutilate themselves, and then they try to convince you to do it to your children.
So
like,
it is definitely a difference in breed. There's something that the old adage for good times make weak men make hard times make strong men. The U.S. is, in my opinion, on the downturn of we had a very good period. Now we're breeding weak men from it. If you take a look at the East, from all the struggles they went through, from communism, from all the wars in Europe and this and that, they went through such a long period of hard times that they have bred a populace that is strong, is able to live through those hard times. Things that people in cities and sometimes you or I wouldn't be able to live through. That's just their normal lives based on our level of living and our comfort for what we want nowadays. We couldn't imagine some of the stuff that they go through every day, and it bred a group of men who is strong enough that, in my opinion, will make hard times for us. I do think that the U.S. will come out, because we always do. We always come out kicking, and like I said before, my best friend, based on what he's told me, the group of guys he's with, I feel like will come out on top. It'll be very hard, and everyone will have to pull together, but the U.S. is going to pull out. I guarantee it.
I mean,
I certainly
if we're talking about an actual conflict, like there's almost no conflict. There's actually no like real scenario where the US just outright loses and we get invaded and we like lose our sovereignty. Like there is almost no situation where that can occur. Just because of our strategic resources, our strategic position, and our populace is just not going to sit down and take that. Like it's just not going to happen. That just cannot happen. Now we can be put into a situation where we are on the back foot and say we lose our ability to be the global governing force that we essentially are today. That absolutely could happen, especially with the disparity between the Chinese Navy in the Pacific Ocean and the American Navy in the Pacific Ocean. Like it's because all of the Chinese Navy is focused in the Pacific, whereas ours is split in between Pacific Command and Atlantic Command. You know, we have less ships than them, period, but they're already split, and that's why they're shifting focus and putting more ships and more modern ships into Pacific Fleet. But it's not going to be enough if you really want to exert our control over that. But if you're talking about a straight up armed conflict, yeah, there's no way that the America can lose insofar as like completely, but we can absolutely reach a point where we have to sign a conditional armistice where we have to basically pull all of our interests out of the Pacific. That's a very real threat, and that's what we're trying to kind of repel from happening, and why we're sending these troops to Taiwan to train them up, because I think that we've realized currently we cannot in any kind of expedient fashion field a force of our own that will match the capabilities of them right now. So we're just getting others to kind of be our proxies in these areas and at least slow them down if something is to occur. And also, the American people aren't going to just rally behind us immediately. It's like we've always operated more off of an isolationist philosophy. Even as much as you guys are going to be like, well, we've been in Iraq, we've been in Afghanistan, yada yada yada. Yeah, but look what it took for us to get there. Like we had to be attacked on our home turf in order for us to really rally behind that. And then after like a few years after, most of the Taliban had been killed, and especially after 2008 when we killed Osama bin Laden, nobody really wanted to be over there anymore. Like our mission had been completed. Like, why the fuck are we still over there?
Well, I mean, once we got over there, we did not have an isolationist mentality at all. We kept expanding our footprint all across the Middle East. We completely destabilized
the army did, absolutely. But I'm talking about the American people, and you need the American people's support to do anything in this country. Unfortunately, not really. Unfortunately,
not really. Unfortunately for them.
Unfortunately for the people that are at the top.
I would say in regards to what you're saying, a full frontal invasion would of course be impossible, but I think with a certain level of espionage that one can argue is already at play, there is the possibility there. I mean, it took us 8 days to shoot down that balloon. Who knows what could have been on that balloon? I mean, what we know now is just surveillance equipment. But
I can tell you right now,
who knows what it could have been?
We knew that it was not a threat. If it had been a threat, they would have knocked it out of the sky. Like this is a lot of misdirection and all that, because unless they've lessened like severely, which I highly doubt that they've lessened, especially with recent escalations and kind of red flags being thrown in the air. We have NORAD, which is always watching the Bering Sea and the airspace around that near Alaska. Like they know essentially everything that flies over there. They knew that balloon had crossed. The issue is when people started seeing it and like the civilians started saying, "Oh, what's this thing flying above us?" And nobody had answers. And then, the Army and the Air Force were like, "Oh, well shit, people are asking questions about this. What do we do?" And then that's why it became an optics thing, and that's why they shot it down.
Well, that's
they knew it wasn't a threat.
That's my point. Is you see this balloon? I'm not saying they didn't know. I know that they knew when it came across Alaska. They said that. My ultimate point is I know that you're saying that they knew it wasn't a threat in quotations, but at the same time, there's no way unless they were part of something that they knew it wasn't a threat. You know what I'm saying?
Well, they, I'm sure, had jets fly right past it and look at it and had eyes on it. That, you can ascertain a lot of things just looking at something, and especially with electronic frequencies, you can detect what they're sending and what it's receiving. And from what I've heard and read about it, it seemed like it was a very isolated thing. They detected that it had sensors, yada yada yada, but it didn't pose any threat. And basically, it was just a surveillance object, which at the end of the day, it's kind of stupid that they had this balloon because they've just been observing us from space for forever,
Well, that's why some people were arguing that maybe it's a new technology, maybe they're looking for something they can't see from too far. But I get at the same time, I get what you're saying. A lot of people have had that same sentiment.
I'll tell you this right now. China currently has no way of having quote unquote more advanced technology. Yes, they can have new and different technologies, but as far as like modern technology is entirely based off of chips, like powerful chips. And
Excuse
we
me.
have the leading production and creation of chips. Like that's just factual.
That
And
was
that's what
my
China has
what I
been
was
fighting
saying.
over.
Hmm.
So, I mean, there's no way that this was some kind of like super weapon ahead of what we have, you know? It just was realistically speaking, it's not really going to happen.
Yeah,
But
when I say like a new technology, I mean in terms of surveillance, not in terms of weaponry. When it comes to weapons, that's just what if it was not we obviously knew it wasn't, but at the same time, 8 days this surveillance balloon going over us. Who's to say they wouldn't have shot it down either way? Whether there was some big capsule on it that we had no idea what the hell it was.
view it as like the US was essentially trying to get a casus belli, like, oh, you have this balloon flying over us questioning our sovereignty. Like, why are you doing this? It's them basically saying, hey, you're questioning our sovereignty. You're flying things over us in our airspace that you shouldn't be. You're breaking our rules of engagement. We have every right to, you know, fight you now. That's what it is, essentially. It's seeking a casus belli. When we know we've been doing that for forever, and like China has said, and I honestly believe, maybe not nearly as much as they said we have, but we most certainly have been observing them and have had similar, you know, vehicles flying over their airspace. Like it's just a factual nature. Like we do. We always have aircraft operating in the Pacific and nearby China. Like we just do.
Oh, I absolutely, I believe it. That's actually one of the. Sometimes I think about this. There's a weird thing. Like when I go to the city in particular, think about this. Is I'm like I'm living my life as a normal person, walking through this maybe not so normal city, but I'm like, there's all sorts of spy games going on right now that I don't know about that could be going on right under me, somewhere in this city with me, and it's just a weird thought I have every once in a while. It's very interesting as well. You know, it's unfortunate that's the reality, but that is the reality. And every once in a while, I do think of that, and it makes me chuckle.
Well, I
I
mean, yeah, countries
I
just poke each other.
Yeah.
That's what they do. And then the US is like kind of the one kid on the playground that like is super sensitive and has that one mom that has told him his entire life like if anybody touches you you need to tell me immediately and you need to tell an adult and da 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 da. Like that's what they're essentially doing is like every time China looks at over at our, you know, military bases yada yada yada, like they're like, "Oh my god, I can't believe you're doing this." When they're constantly the ones going around, you know, poking everybody, just being the annoying little kid on the playground, like doing everything that they can to annoy everybody. But as soon as somebody does it to them, they don't like it, and they go and tell the adults.
We're the big fat kid with ridiculous amounts of strength.
yeah,
I'm not saying that we don't have strength, but
Well, that's
the way we go about it is
that's
kind
what
of
I was saying is we on that playground, we're the big fat kid with ridiculous amounts of strength, who are at the same time a huge crybaby.
exactly, yeah.
that, that's that's one reason why I think that we have entered into a new generation of warfare called fourth generation warfare,
You mean fifth
where it's all
generation warfare?
yeah fifth
Yep,
generation warfare.
I know
I'm
what you're
sorry,
talking about.
where it's all the propaganda and how the U.S. will be our own downfall. Like us as a country will be our own downfall with the bifurcation of our culture. How if you just take a look between cities and rural life, it is two completely different universes. And right now, I guarantee our enemies are looking at us and laughing with how we cannot get our shit together, how we have no unifying vision anymore as a country. That's why you have representatives like Marjorie Taylor Greene calling for peaceful divorce. That's why back in the 2020 election cycle, you had California, a bunch of people, a bunch of representatives gathering in California playing war games, saying that if Trump won, this is what's going to happen. We're going to have a civil war. You have California threatening themselves that they will secede from the union
Please do.
if Trump did win. So you've had secession talks, you have had uh, bifurcation talks for the past 10, 15 years, and we're getting to a boiling point to where the U.S. cannot sustain it. We would
Excuse
not
me.
be able to sustain any kind of war as well as dealing with our own internal strife.
Oh, absolutely. And people have known that since, I mean, I would, venture to say, since the War of 1812, like people have known that you're not going to invade America unless you have plenty of access through Canada or Mexico. And that's why, I mean, you have the, what is it called? The something telegraph, where we caught the Germans talking to Mexico, like saying, hey, if you invade them, we'll support you in World War One. And like that was a big reason why we went into that conflict, is because they realized even way back then where there's no way that you flip America, you invade America without going either through Mexico or Canada, or and why we were really against the communists in post World War II era, where we actually had people like forget this, a large communist party in America, relatively speaking, because it was worrying and people were worried about that. It was an internal thing, and that's why there was a war on communism. And like we were so pent up and focused on fighting communism everywhere so that we didn't allow it spread into our nation specifically.
Except it did spread. It just took a different name.
Yeah, unfortunately.
And to go back to your comment about the War of 1812, the only reason that the U.S. came out halfway on top of that war is because a little short French man was knocking his stick at the British. So the only reason the British did not keep up the offensive here in America is because they had to deal with the French. They couldn't spare all the resources over here, which is why they pulled back, because they burned Washington D.C. and we had no army at all to be able to stop them, because we were up north in Canada trying to take I think it was Montreal.
Hey, as much as people might bash on the French, they're our oldest ally, and there's no denying that.
I
They are
say
the
that
oldest
all
ally.
the
Even
time,
when they're
actually.
trying to help us, they're
Like
always
when
helping
we
us.
like when we undercut them in that deal with Australia regarding the submarines. I think something between like a nuclear or a diesel powered submarine, and then we undercut them, made the deal with Australia. Australia canceled their deal with the French. The French got really angry and then made a deal with China. That was one of the moments that I was just kind of like, what are we doing? Yeah, in reality, like I said, that's our old, like you just said, that's our oldest ally. That was kind of my first thought. We shouldn't be fucking them over like this.
I mean, how a civil war is definitely coming, and everybody will be all of our enemies are going to be chomping at the bit to try to get a piece of that action, to try to get to the point to where they think that they could control as much of the U.S. as possible. Because any kind of divide will weaken us and will definitely take us off of our global pedestal if we were to divide.
I mean,
Which I see that
that's
as kind of inevitable at this point.
that kind of for an exact divide you'd have to really define, because it's a little difficult considering a lot of America is red counties and blue states. But that kind of goes into what I was saying before, though, with perhaps there's a certain level of espionage going on that could lead to some sort of invasion of the US. It would all come from starting with civil distrust, civil dismay, which my point was they might already be doing that if you really look at how things are going.
I mean, just look at how disgruntled the American populace is. Look at how we are at an all-time low for trusting of the media. We do not trust anybody who is in any kind of key seat in any kind of mainstream media outlet. We don't trust the president. We don't trust his press secretary. We don't trust anything that's coming from upstairs, whether it's true or not, just because of all the blatant lies and disregard for the American people. They think we're stupid, which a lot of us are, but still.
Yeah. You have anything, Trevor?
I mean, I don't disagree with you. I think that we definitely have a lot of mistrust, but at the end of the day, there's no real resolution for that except for like large changes in ideology, which is not going to be a quick thing to happen. I don't think that there's going to be any kind of immediate civil war like a lot of people say. I just don't see it happening. There's not. Yes, there's a large divide, but there's no like want for violence, and there's no key goals. Like, people are saying, "Oh, I don't like this. I don't like this. I don't like this," but they don't have any way of fixing that. And nobody's saying, "Oh, well, if we seceded, we could do everything on our own." Like, nobody has that real want. Like, California threw it up in the air, but they didn't really mean that. Like, and it's clear with that. The only one that I can actually see happening is this Greater Idaho thing, which I think is hilarious and I think absolutely should happen. Not really, if you
Yeah.
think about it, like, in depth, because that's just divisive. It's just dividing people more.
Is that
But
the certain
I think
parts
it's
of
hilarious.
Oregon want to join Idaho? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I love it's
It
so
really
hilarious.
is, yeah.
But
I
at the
I
end of the day,
am
it's more divisive.
I am inclined to agree with you actually. I personally don't think there's going to be a civil war. I think that is a bit silly the way people have been, at least the way people have been presenting reasons for it as of right now. I see, like what I was saying is I could see the possibility of some sort of enhanced form of espionage to lead to something where there's so much internal dismay there's the possibility of an invasion. I don't, whether or not that actually happens is a big question. That's more a hypothetical that I see as possible, but I personally don't see a civil war in our future
Well,
anytime soon personally.
and really, when you look at it, it's just the basics of how they've set things up. Like, they've been very smart in preventing the American people from even having the chance to do that, because it used to be you were assigned to a division and you kind of stayed with that unit for like most of your life, and there were militias and yada yada yada. And I'm talking specifically like 1861, when we actually had our Civil War. Like, back then there were militias, and when you were in a unit, you were in it for life. And like, the military community was very uh I don't want to say small, but it was, everybody kind of knew each other, and that's why you have generals that in the Civil War went to West Point with one another. Like, they knew each other, and they knew each other well. You don't have that anymore. We're so separated and divided, and they intentionally rotate people in and out of units so that you don't get too attached to one another, and you don't have these communities that build, so that if you have differing ideologies than, say, the government, you can't form a military junta and you know have some kind of rebellion. It's just very, very difficult to do that within the military, and that's the only way that you're actually going to effectively start any kind of civil war that's going to have any longevity. Is you have to do it from within the military, seize military assets, and march on the Capitol. And there's a great scene. I love the show The Crown, where like they're kind of theoretically going through what it would take in order to seize control of Great Britain. And they're right. It takes, you have to seize the hearts of the American people, and you have to have at least enough people to seize the key centers of the government, of Congress, and of like key military strategic places. And you just realistically aren't going to be able to do that with how our military structure is right now.
Well,
Yeah, I'd certainly agree.
if take a look at these, the only reason I'm a believer that a civil war is going to happen is because the first American, the as I say, first American Civil War. The first American Civil War is a very different kind of revolution, very different type of civil war than you would see generally across the entirety of the world. I mean, take a look at the Syrian Civil War. You had 8 to 10 different factions vying for power. You had the uprisings in Egypt, where it was multiple different factions vying for power. You don't necessarily have clear dividing lines in any kind of civil war. The only reason why the U.S. had its defining lines was because of the states seceding before Abraham Lincoln and seceding before the Battle of Fort Sumter, because it was originally peaceful until the Battle of Fort Sumter, which is when all hell broke loose.
I get what you're saying, but at the same time, those were also very corrupt and disjointed governments anyways. In the situation where there is a civil war, there's likely going to be several different factions, but they're going to be fighting for the same basic ideologies, and they're going to kind of group up. If they even have time to do that, which I don't think that they would, because the central government would mobilize first the National Guard and then the actual military against these factions. And there's just no real way to build a army to fight against the federal government, against our own actual formal military. There just isn't a way to do that. Unless you are the governor of a state and your entire National Guard agrees to fight with you, which they're not. I mean, 9 times out of 10, they're not going to. That's the only way that you have any chance.
I guess we can agree to disagree. You can take a look at all the factions that we have growing around the U.S. between Antifa, BOM. You had the Proud Boys there for a small stint. You had the My Patriot or something, Patriot Prayer, I think it was, which was co-opted by the feds. But you do have a bunch of factions that are growing in the U.S. trying to gain some kind of steam. You have the Antifa and BOM, where the mainstream media holds them at like a pedestal with like, you can't talk about these people, you can't say anything negative about them, they are not real. But then you take a look at Patriot Prayer, you take a look at the Proud Boys, they get labeled with all the hate in the world that can be mustered against them. I
Well, I
do see
mean,
factions growing. I see disenfranchised people across the U.S. who are tired of always being looked down upon, always being seen as lesser people.
I absolutely understand. Yes, there are undoubtedly these factions growing. That is undoubtable. But what I'm saying is, and this is the last point that I'll make about it, look at what happens when Antifa starts one of their riots and they start rampaging through a city. The police aren't actually fighting them. They aren't. They're ordered to pull back. And in the states that they actually are allowed to go out there and disperse these crowds, they do so pretty effectively. And they don't last that long. And that's why Chaz was allowed to become a thing. It was allowed to become a thing. And that's why everybody's fighting against it, saying, why didn't you mobilize either the National Guard or just the police force there to push them out? If they had mobilized the National Guard to push out Chaz, it would have been done in 2 days. But they didn't, because what you're saying is they're not wanting to accept these groups as being violent, yada, yada, yada. But in the case where there would be some kind of civil war, one side or the other is going to be targeted, and they're going to have the National Guard mobilized against them. Or they're going to have some kind of organized, regulated army mobilized against them, and they're just not going to last. It's like what Biden says, and it's the only point that I somewhat agree with. Your AR-15 isn't going to take down F-22 Raptor. It's not.
But the AK-47 took down the U.S. military.
Where?
Afghanistan.
If you're talking about an insurgent group, yes.
Take a look at Iraq, take a look at Afghanistan, take a look at Syria. The AK-47 has done wonders for toppling the U.S. with insurgent groups. That is what I see as civil war being, insurgent groups.
Yes, but that only works when your neighbors aren't ratting you out, because that's what's happening over there. Unless you want to go to the length of you're killing your neighbors to keep them from ratting you out, that's how far you have to go. And that's what they're doing.
That's a difference in culture there. America does not have that type of culture to allow for that type of insurgent group to exist.
And we also don't have the infrastructure. You can go into the Rocky Mountains, but they're going to know you're in the Rocky Mountains. And when we effectively utilized our weapons against, the Taliban and ISIS and all that, when Schwarzkopf was allowed to go off, he fucking went off and he annihilated those motherfuckers. But most of it was we didn't want to use our best shit. We were kind of on our heels. We were nation building. We weren't really doing what we wanted to do and wipe them out. We were trying to get these nations to develop their own armies to fight them off, because we didn't want to be over there, and we didn't have our large-scale military over there. We had a few thousand people, 20,000, 30,000, however many. I'm not saying it was a little amount and that we weren't fighting them, but it was nowhere near the amount of people that you would have in a civil war kind of conflict. And that's all I'm saying is, at the end of the day, you could absolutely cause some chaos and you could cause some damage, but you're not going to hold out long term unless you seize military assets.
And I'm not
Yeah,
saying
you
I
basically.
disagree. I'm not saying I disagree with you in the sense that it would not last long, but I do see something brewing. I do see that there is something that is to come in the U.S. I don't know whether it's going to be violent or not, but I do see some kind of civil conflict brewing.
To effectively what you'd have to do is have you ever played anti-Stasi on Arma 3?
No.
No.
You'd have to effectively play anti-Stasi, but in real life. And if you've ever played anti-Stasi, you know how many times you die before you actually get an automatic weapon. It's just
And
not gonna
even
happen. Yeah.
even that isn't realistic at all because
Yeah.
in order to get actual, like, say you do organize 1,000 people to go and take over a military base, which is a very unrealistic number of people to actually take over a military base. Okay, so now we have M1 Abrams and F-15 Eagles, yada yada yada. But nobody here that just took this base knows how to fly those or operate those. Oh shit, what are we gonna fucking do with these things, And that's the situation, is unless you have a large part of a military junta joining you and operating with you and working alongside you, there is no way that you are going to mount an effective resistance against an organized army.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think we've made quite a lot of progress
Yeah,
here, but I think it's about
we
time to
made a
end it
lot.
off.
Oh yes, I've enjoyed the conversation.
Indeed.
I
Well,
have
I
enjoyed it as
think
well.
I think that is the end for us today. I appreciate those of you who joined us on this episode of the Whiskey Lounge. Anyone else have final statements?
Thank you for watching.
Thank you for
Yes,
watching, and
thank you.
that is a brilliant final statement. You have the same thing to say, Nick.
Yes, thank you for watching. And even though we disagree on certain things, the conversations need to be had, and I, that's exactly what we're here for.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And check us out on our socials.
Check us out on our socials. I am starting to take a little bit of control on those and posting a lot more, so a little more of our, or at least some of my opinions, and well, generally those ones will be shared ones, but either way, check us out. All right, I will thank you all one more time for watching and talk to you all later.